Hey there. Welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. I was 11 years old at the time, living in a medium-sized city in South Africa. Our neighborhood wasn't the worst place you could live, but it wasn't completely safe either. Like many families around us, we had security gates, alarms, and an unspoken understanding that you always stayed alert. Even as a child, I knew that crime was something people worried about. Still, that day began like any other, and nothing felt out of the ordinary. My mother and my sister had gone out shopping together earlier that day. My stepfather was at work, and I wasn't feeling well, so I stayed home alone. It wasn't the first time I had been by myself for a few hours, and I didn't think much of it. I remember feeling a bit weak and tired, curled up on the couch in the living room with a blanket. The television was on, and I was watching Mythbusters, on one of my favorite shows. It was familiar and comforting, the kind of thing you put on when you want to relax and forget about everything else. The house felt quiet in a normal way. The TV filled the room with sound, and outside everything seemed calm. I was half focused on the show when I suddenly heard a noise coming from the back of the house. At first, it didn't alarm me. We had dogs, and they were often moving around the yard. Sometimes they scratched at the door or made noise if they wanted to be let inside. I muted the TV and listened more closely. The noise happened again, louder this time. There was banging, followed by scratching. It sounded urgent, rougher than usual, but my first thought was still that it was the dogs. I didn't stop to think deeply about it. I didn't feel scared yet. I just assumed they were being impatient. I got up from the couch and walked toward the back door. As I got closer, the noises became more intense. The scratching wasn't random. It felt deliberate. Even then, my brain didn't fully connect the dots. I reached for the door handle, unlocked it, and opened the door. The moment the door opened, my entire world shifted. Standing right outside were 4 grown men. They weren't my dogs. They weren't delivery workers. They weren't lost or confused. They were right there, close enough that I could see their faces clearly. Their expressions weren't friendly or surprised. They looked caught, but not harmless. In that split second, everything inside me went cold. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember making any sound at all. My body reacted before my mind did. Instinct took over. I slammed the door shut with all the strength I had. I could feel them pushing back against it for a moment, and the fear that shot through me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lock it again. I knew immediately that they were trying to break in. There was no doubt in my mind. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I ran toward the alarm panel, my legs barely feeling like they belonged to me. I tried to hit the emergency button, praying it would work. Nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. Panic set in fully at that point. I was 11 years old, sick, alone, and trapped in a house with 4 men trying to get inside. My thoughts were racing, and I could barely breathe. I remember thinking that this couldn't be happening. It didn't feel real. It felt like something that happened to other people, something you heard about on the news. I didn't wait around to see if the alarm would suddenly work. I ran back into the lounge and slammed the security gate shut behind me. The metal gate clanged loudly, the sound echoing through the house. I didn't know if they had heard it or not, but I didn't care. I needed something between me and them. I dropped down behind the couch, pressing myself as low as I could, trying to make myself invisible. My entire body was shaking. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven, and I tried desperately to quiet it. Every sound felt amplified. Every second stretched out longer than the last. I reached for my phone with trembling hands. My first instinct was to call my mom. I knew the police wouldn't help much. In South Africa, calling the police often meant waiting far too long, especially in situations like this. My mum felt like my only real option. I dialed her number, my fingers slipping as I tried to hold the phone steady. That's when I realized I had no minutes. I stared at the screen in disbelief, hoping I was wrong. I tried again, nothing. No signal, no credit. I felt completely helpless. Tears started streaming down my face, but I tried to stay silent. I didn't want to make any noise that could give away where I was hiding. I stayed there behind the couch, curled up and shaking, for what felt like forever. I didn't know what was happening outside. I didn't know if they were still there, if they were trying to get in through another door, or if they were waiting. Every small sound made my heart jump. I imagined footsteps, voices, hands on door handles. My mind filled in the worst possible scenarios. Time moved strangely. Minutes felt like hours. I checked the time on my phone over and over again, trying to distract myself, trying to feel like I had some control over the situation. I was terrified to move. I was terrified to stay still. There was no safe option. I stayed hidden for 3 hours, 3 long, agonizing hours of fear, uncertainty, and helplessness. My body ached from staying curled up in the same position. My throat felt dry and my head was spinning. I don't think I fully understood how scared I was until later, looking back. In the moment, I was running purely on survival. Eventually, the house went completely quiet. It had probably been quiet for a long time, but I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything. Even when I heard no more noises, I stayed where I was. I didn't move until I heard the front door open and my mother calling my name. When I finally came out from behind the couch and saw her, I completely broke down. All the fear I had been holding in rushed out at once. I tried to explain what happened between sobs, my words tumbling over each other. My mom was horrified. She hugged me tightly, shaking just as much as I was. Later, we found out what had actually happened. The 4 men had been trying to break into the house, but when I opened the door and they realized someone was home, they ran. They hadn't expected anyone to be there. They hadn't managed to take anything. Nothing was stolen. Physically, everything was fine. But I wasn't. Even though nothing was taken, that experience changed me. I learned how quickly a normal day can turn into something terrifying. I learned how vulnerable you can be, especially as a child. I learned that danger doesn't always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it sounds like something familiar, something harmless, right up until the moment it isn't. For a long time after that, I couldn't relax when I was alone. Every noise made me tense. Every knock or scratch at the door made my heart race. I became more cautious, more aware, maybe even more anxious than I should have been at such a young age. Even now, years later, I can still remember the feeling of standing at that door and seeing those 4 men. I can remember the helplessness of trying to call for help and realizing I couldn't. I can remember hiding behind the couch, counting the seconds, hoping someone would come home. Nothing was stolen that day, but something was taken from me, a sense of safety, a sense of innocence. It's strange how moments like that stay with you, how they shape the way you see the world. I survived. I was lucky. And I never open a door without thinking twice anymore. I was 19 years old when this happened. and looking back now, I can clearly see how careless and naive I was at the time. I didn't think of myself as reckless, just young and confident in the way only someone that age can be. I assumed that bad things happened to other people, not to me, and that if something felt a little off, it would probably turn out to be nothing. That mindset almost got me into serious trouble. I was house-sitting for my aunt and uncle while they were away on vacation with my cousins. Their house was in a fairly secluded area, not completely rural, but far enough away from busy streets that it felt quiet and private. The kind of neighborhood where people felt safe, leaving their doors unlocked during the day and didn't expect unexpected visitors at night. I had agreed to stay there for a while to take care of the house and the dogs, and I didn't think twice about it. That day, I had driven straight from school to their house. It was late afternoon, edging into early evening, and the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. Traffic wasn't heavy, and the drive was mostly uneventful. At least that's what I thought at first. I didn't realize until much later that something had already started to feel wrong. Somewhere along the drive, an older car had pulled in behind me. It was beat up, the kind of car you notice only because it looks like it's barely holding together. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Cars end up behind you all the time. It's normal. I wasn't paying attention to how long it stayed there or how closely it followed me. It wasn't until I turned onto my aunt and uncle's street that I really became aware of it. Their street was quiet, lined with trees, and not a place where you usually saw random traffic passing through. When I slowed down to turn, the car slowed down too. When I turned onto the street, it followed. That was the first moment I felt that small, uncomfortable twinge in my stomach. I tried to brush it off. I told myself maybe they lived nearby. Maybe they were visiting someone. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But as I drove farther down the street, I realized the car was still right behind me. The street wasn't long, and there were only a few houses. There was no reason for someone to be following me that closely unless they were going to one of the same houses. My heart started beating faster. I remember gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, suddenly very aware of how alone I was. I was a young woman driving by myself, about to pull into a secluded driveway. Even then, with all the warning signs, I didn't make the smartest decision. Instead of driving past the house or turning around, I did the exact opposite of what I should have done. I pulled straight into my aunt and uncle's driveway. At the time, my thinking was painfully flawed but felt logical in my head. I knew their house had an alarm system. Once you opened the door, you had about 30 seconds to enter the code before the system started calling people and possibly the police. I figured that if I could just get inside quickly, everything would be fine. I told myself that as long as I made it through the door, I would be safe. As soon as I parked, I jumped out of the car and sprinted to the front door. I didn't even look back. I didn't grab anything from my car. I just ran. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a second to get the key into the lock. I could practically feel the presence of the person behind me, even though I never actually turned around to confirm what he was doing. I got the door open and rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me. The alarm started beeping immediately, loud and urgent. My heart was racing as I punched in the code as fast as I could. I don't even remember if I did it correctly on the first try or if I had to redo it. All I remember is the sound stopping and the sudden silence that followed. Instead of stopping there and staying put, I made another bad decision. I ran upstairs. At the time, I thought getting farther into the house would somehow make me safer. In reality, if someone had broken in, I would have trapped myself. I didn't think about escape routes or visibility or anything like that. I was operating purely on adrenaline and fear. Once upstairs, I went to a window and looked out. That's when I finally saw him clearly. The older guy was still there, sitting in his car at the end of the driveway. He hadn't pulled away. He hadn't turned around. He was just sitting there, like he was deciding what to do next. I could see his car idling. The whole situation felt surreal, like I was watching something happen to someone else. My cousin's truck was parked in the driveway. My aunt and uncle had left it there because the whole family had met at the house and taken one car to the airport. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it, but now I'm convinced that truck made a difference. It made it look like someone else might be home. On top of that, my aunt and uncle had 2 large dogs. They were loud, protective, and not shy about making noise when someone unfamiliar was nearby. Between the truck and the dogs, something must have made the man hesitate. He sat there for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then he drove off. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it didn't last. A minute or 2 later, I saw his car again. He circled back, driving slowly past the house, like he was checking to see if I would come back outside or if anything had changed. I stayed frozen at the window, barely breathing. I didn't want him to see movement. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. After that second pass, he finally drove away and didn't come back. Once I was sure he was gone, my legs felt weak. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, and tried to calm myself down. Only then did it really hit me how dangerous that situation could have been. If he had gotten out of his car, if the door had been locked and I'd fumbled with the keys longer, if the alarm hadn't worked, if there hadn't been a truck in the driveway or dogs in the house, so many things could have gone wrong. I spent the rest of that night on edge. Every sound made me jump. I double-checked every lock. I kept the dogs close. I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the drive over and over, wondering how long he had actually been following me and what his intentions were. The scariest part is that I never knew for sure what he wanted. And maybe he was just a creepy guy with no plan. Maybe he was looking for an opportunity. Maybe he would have driven away, no matter what I did. But the fact that he followed me onto a secluded street and waited in my driveway tells me that his intentions probably weren't good. As I've gotten older, this experience has stuck with me. It changed the way I think about personal safety, especially as a young woman. I realized how dangerous it is to assume that home automatically means safe. Sometimes, going straight home is the worst thing you can do if you think someone is following you. If I could go back and talk to my 19-year-old self, I would tell her to do things very differently. I would tell her not to pull into the driveway. I would tell her to keep driving, to go somewhere public, a friend's house, a grocery store, a mall, a gas station, anywhere with people, lights, and cameras. That's advice I give to everyone now, especially young women. If you even think you might be being followed, don't go home. Don't lead someone to where you sleep. Don't assume you'll be able to outrun or outthink someone in the moment. Put yourself somewhere visible and public, where help is close by, and where someone with bad intentions is more likely to give up. I was lucky that night. Luckier than I probably deserved to be, given the choices I made. Nothing bad happened, but it easily could have. And the fact that it didn't doesn't make the situation any less serious. That experience taught me that danger doesn't always look dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it's just an old car behind you for a little too long. Sometimes it's a bad feeling you don't want to acknowledge. And sometimes listening to that feeling and acting smartly is the difference between a close call and something far worse. I got away unharmed, but I never forgot how vulnerable I felt standing in that driveway, knowing someone had followed me there. It's a lesson I carry with me, and one I hope others never have to learn the hard way. That night started out feeling harmless, even forgettable, the kind of night you don't expect to remember years later. I wasn't alone. I was with a close friend, and we had just gotten back to his parents' place sometime around 2 in the morning. We had been at a party, and by the time we left, We were both pretty drunk and high. We hadn't driven ourselves, so at least there was that small comfort. But our heads were foggy, our reactions slow, and our sense of reality dulled in that loose, careless way that happens late at night when you think the night is already over. His parents' house was in a quiet area, the kind of place where nothing ever really happens. No nightlife, no traffic at that hour, no reason for anyone to be hanging around outside. That's part of why we felt so relaxed. We weren't worried about neighbors, noise, or anything else. The plan was simple. We were going to smoke a bit more before crashing. His parents were asleep, and we had a spot in the backyard that was hidden well enough that we could do our thing without being seen. The backyard was large and heavily surrounded by trees. It felt cut off from the rest of the world, like a pocket of darkness tucked away from the house and the street. That was why it had become the smoking spot. You could stand back there and feel like no one else existed. As soon as we got inside, my friend said he needed to grab his weed from his room. I told him I'd meet him out back. I also really had to pee, and I figured I'd take care of that first since we were already outside and no one could see back there anyway. It didn't feel risky. It felt convenient. I walked through the house and out into the backyard alone. The air was cool, and everything felt quiet in that deep, late-night way where even small sounds feel louder than they should. The trees blocked out most of the light, and the yard was mostly shadows, but I'd been back there enough times to know where everything was. I stepped farther back, closer to the wall of the house, near the area where the trees made the yard feel even more closed in. I unzipped and got ready to pee, completely relaxed, my mind slow and unfocused. I wasn't thinking about danger. I wasn't thinking about anything other than the fact that I needed to go. As I started, something made me look up. At first, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. My eyes landed on a shape that didn't belong, but because I was so high and drunk, there was a delay between seeing and understanding. My vision adjusted, and that's when it hit me. There was a man standing right there. He was dressed entirely in black. Black hoodie, black pants, everything blending into the shadows except for the outline of his body and his face, which I could just barely make out. He was pressed up against the wall of the house, hugging it tightly like he was trying to stay hidden. But he wasn't hidden, not from me. He was looking directly at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. My brain completely locked up. I was standing there with my pants down, completely exposed, staring at a stranger in my friend's backyard in the middle of the night. The situation was so absurd, so unexpected, that I couldn't even feel fear right away. It was pure confusion. We locked eyes, not a glance, not a split-second look. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably around 10 seconds. 10 long, silent seconds where neither of us said a word or made a sound. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should yell, run, or pretend I hadn't seen him. My body felt frozen, like my muscles had forgotten how to work. The man didn't look surprised. That's what stuck with me later. He didn't jump back or flinch like someone who'd been caught accidentally. He just stared, eyes locked on mine, his body still pressed flat against the wall. There was something intentional about the way he was standing there, like he had been watching or waiting. My heart started pounding, but I still couldn't move. Being high made everything slower, heavier. My thoughts felt like they were stuck in mud. A part of me wondered if I was hallucinating. Part of me wondered if this was some kind of messed up joke. None of it made sense. Then, without warning, he moved. In one quick motion, he pushed off the wall, grabbed onto something above him, and scrambled up with shocking speed. He moved like someone who knew exactly what they were doing, like they had climbed that wall before or had planned an escape route. Within seconds, he was gone, disappearing over the wall and into the darkness beyond. Just like that, he vanished. I stood there for a moment longer, my body still locked in place, trying to understand what had just happened. The yard felt different now. The darkness felt heavier, closer. Every shadow looked suspicious. My heart was racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. I hurriedly finished, zipped up, and practically ran back toward the house. My legs felt weak, and my hands were shaking. As soon as I got inside, I found my friend and started talking all at once, stumbling over my words as I tried to explain what I had just seen. I told him there was a guy in his backyard. I told him where he was standing, what he was wearing, how close he was. I told him the part about us locking eyes, about how he climbed the wall and disappeared. My friend laughed at first. He thought I was messing with him. He said I was just too high. He said there was no way someone was sneaking around his parents' backyard at 2 a.m. He brushed it off like a dumb stoner moment, something that would sound ridiculous in the morning. I started to doubt myself too. The way he reacted made me question my own memory. Maybe I had imagined it. And maybe my brain filled in a shadow with a person because I was intoxicated. I didn't like that explanation, but it was easier than accepting what I had seen. We were still talking about it when we heard it. A loud engine revved somewhere nearby, not a normal, casual sound. It was aggressive, sudden, and close. Tires squealed, and then the sound of a car speeding away filled the air. Whoever it was drove like their life depended on getting out of there as fast as possible. The sound faded into the distance, leaving the house silent again. My friend stopped laughing. We looked at each other, and I didn't have to say anything. The look on his face told me he understood now. Something had happened. Someone had been there, and they had left in a hurry. The mood changed instantly. Any thought of smoking more disappeared. The house no longer felt safe or quiet. Every sound made us jump. We checked the doors and windows, locking everything, even though most of it already was. We stayed inside the rest of the night, lights on, trying to act normal while replaying everything over and over in our heads. Later, lying awake, the reality of it really sank in. If I hadn't looked up when I did, I never would have known he was there. If he had moved differently, if he had chosen not to leave, I don't know what would have happened. I was intoxicated, vulnerable, and completely unprepared to deal with a stranger in the dark. What scared me most wasn't just that there was someone there. It was how comfortable he seemed, how quietly he blended into the space, how quickly he escaped. That wasn't someone lost or confused. That was someone who didn't want to be seen. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he was doing there. I don't know if he had been watching the house, waiting for the right moment, or if he had already been there before we arrived. I don't know if we interrupted something worse, or if we were the reason he left. I also don't know why he didn't react with fear when I saw him. That part still bothers me. The calmness, the way he held eye contact, the way he moved when he decided to leave. I've thought about that moment more times than I can count. The absurdity of it, the vulnerability, the realization that danger doesn't always announce itself with noise or violence. Sometimes it's just a person standing quietly in the dark, close enough to touch you, waiting. Being drunk and high probably saved me in a strange way. If I had been sober, I might have yelled or run, and that could have changed everything. Instead, we just stared at each other, two people caught in a moment neither of us expected. Nothing else happened that night. No confrontation, no break-in, no explanation. But that moment stuck with me. It changed the way I think about safety and awareness, especially at night. It taught me how quickly a situation can turn from relaxed to terrifying, and how thin the line is between a normal night and something far worse. Even now, years later, I can still see him in my mind. The way he hugged the wall, the way the darkness seemed to swallow him when he left, and the sound of that engine revving, tearing away into the night, like a final confirmation that what I saw was real. I wasn't technically alone when it happened, but my fiancée didn't experience any of it, so it felt like I was. In that moment, it was just me and whatever was outside. My fiancée and I had just moved into our first apartment together. It wasn't in a great part of town. It was the kind of place you choose because it's cheap, not because it feels safe. The buildings were old, the street lights were unreliable, and you learned quickly to mind your own business. We told ourselves it was temporary, just a starting point until we could afford somewhere better. It was around 11 at night, and I was in the kitchen making something quick to eat. It was July, hot and sticky, so we had all the windows open to let whatever breeze we could find move through the apartment. The back door was behind me, and the kitchen window was off to my left. Well, I was standing there focused on what I was doing, half awake and not thinking about much of anything. That's when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At first, my brain didn't register what it was. Just movement, just a shape where there shouldn't have been one. When I turned my head slightly, my stomach dropped. There was a man's face pressed up against the screen of the kitchen window. He wasn't passing by. He wasn't glancing in. He was staring straight at me. Close enough that I could see the outline of his features through the mesh. His face was so near the screen that it felt invasive, like the only thing separating us was a thin layer of wire and air. Time slowed down instantly. I didn't scream. I didn't jump. Years of living in sketchy neighborhoods kicked in automatically. You don't react. You don't let them know they've rattled you. You don't escalate unless you absolutely have to. I forced myself to act normal, even though my heart was hammering in my chest. I calmly wiped the utensil in my hand like nothing was wrong. I kept my movements slow and steady. Then I turned and walked toward the living room, making sure I didn't look back at the window. The second I was out of sight, the fear hit me all at once. I rushed to my fiancé, who was sitting in the living room, and grabbed his arm. "Babe!" I whispered urgently. "Babe! There was just a guy outside the window staring at me." The words tumbled out of me in a rush. My voice was shaking, and I didn't even try to hide it. He was on his feet instantly. Without saying much, he went straight into the bedroom to grab his .45 handgun. While he was gone, I stood there frozen, listening. That's when I heard it. Footsteps running behind the house. The screen door to the back was open because of the heat, and the sound carried clearly through the night. Whoever had been at the window was moving fast now, like they'd realized they'd been noticed. The sound of his footsteps faded quickly, heading toward the back of the building. My fiancé came back out, gun in hand, and moved straight to the back door. He stood there, positioning himself between the door and the rest of the apartment, and flipped on the outside light. The sudden brightness washed over the yard, exposing everything outside. We waited. Nothing happened. No movement, no sound, no figure stepping into view. After a minute or two, my fiancé lowered the gun slightly and said something about the guy probably being gone. He stepped away from the door, relaxing just a little, and then it happened. I swear on everything, the man suddenly sprinted past the house again, but this time in the opposite direction. Full speed, no hesitation, just pure, frantic movement. The way he ran was unsettling, like someone in a panic or someone who wasn't thinking clearly at all. It was that wild, erratic sprint you see from someone who's either high, desperate, or both. The sight of it sent a cold shock through me. If my fiancé hadn't turned the light on, if he hadn't been standing there, I don't know what the man might have done. The idea that he came back, even after running away, made my skin crawl. It felt like he was testing us, watching, waiting to see if the coast was clear. That wasn't the only time something like that happened. On another night, I had just gotten out of the shower. The bathroom was steamy. and I was standing there drying off, wrapped in a towel, feeling relaxed and unaware. Then I heard it, tap, 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 4 fingers tapping rhythmically against the bathroom window. I froze instantly. My heart jumped straight into my throat. It wasn't random knocking or accidental noise. It was deliberate, measured, almost playful. I stood there, barely breathing, staring at the window. Then it happened again. Tap, 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 and again. 3 times in a row. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. My mind raced through every worst-case scenario at once. Someone knew I was there. Someone was close enough to reach the window. Someone was choosing to make their presence known instead of breaking in or leaving. When the tapping finally stopped, the silence felt louder than the noise had been. I got dressed as fast as I could, my hands shaking, and went straight to my fiancé. He checked outside, checked the locks, checked the windows. Nothing, no one. No sign that anyone had been there. But I knew what I heard. Living in that apartment changed the way I looked at safety. It taught me how thin the line really is between being alone and being watched, between routine and danger, between a normal night and something that could have gone very wrong. Even now, I can still picture that face pressed against the screen, staring at me through the mesh like I was on display. And I can still hear the sound of that sprint in the dark, the frantic rhythm of someone running just out of sight. Some places don't just feel unsafe, they prove it. And once that happens, you never really relax there again. This happened when I was living in Florida, in a house that sat on one of those roads that felt almost forgotten by the rest of the world. It was quiet in a way that made every sound feel louder than it should. The road wasn't just quiet during the day, it was dark and empty at night too. No street lights nearby, barely any traffic, and houses spread far enough apart that you couldn't easily see your neighbors. During the day, it felt peaceful. At night, it felt isolated. That night, I was home alone. It wasn't unusual for me, and I wasn't feeling scared or on edge beforehand. It was warm, the kind of Florida heat that sticks to your skin even after the sun goes down. So I had the windows open to let in whatever breeze might wander through. One of those windows was in the living room, and it was open just a couple of feet behind my head where I was sitting on the couch. I didn't think twice about it. I'd done the same thing plenty of times before. I was watching TV, half paying attention, half lost in my own thoughts. The house was otherwise quiet. No music, no phone buzzing, no other distractions. Just the low sound of the television filling the room. Outside, there were no crickets, no cars, no voices. The night felt still, almost frozen. Out of nowhere, I sneezed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a normal sneeze, the kind you don't even think about. But immediately after it happened, before I could even register the sound myself, I heard a voice right behind me, coming from outside the open window. "Bless you." The voice was calm, casual, close, too close. For a split second, my brain didn't react at all. It was like my mind accepted the words automatically, the same way you do when someone says it in a normal situation. Then reality slammed into me all at once. I was alone. I hadn't been talking to anyone. There was no reason for anyone to be standing outside my window, especially not close enough to speak in a normal tone and be heard clearly over the TV. My entire body jolted like I'd been shocked. I jumped up from the couch so fast I nearly knocked it over. My heart started pounding immediately, hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I spun around toward the window, half expecting to see a face right there, staring back at me through the screen. There was nothing, just darkness. The yard outside was pitch black, the kind of darkness where your eyes struggle to adjust. I couldn't see movement, couldn't see a silhouette. I couldn't see anything at all. That somehow made it worse. If I had seen someone running away, at least it would have made sense. Instead, it felt like the voice had come from nowhere. I didn't stop to think. Fear took over completely. I ran to the front door and threw it open, stepping out onto the porch like maybe whoever had spoken would still be there, walking away down the road. I scanned left and right, my breath shallow, my ears straining for any sound of footsteps or movement. There was no one. The road was empty, completely silent. No cars, no people, no sound of anyone running, no rustling bushes, nothing. Just the same quiet darkness that had been there before, like nothing had happened at all. That's when the fear really settled in, because whoever had spoken to me had been close enough to hear a sneeze through an open window. I respond immediately and then disappear without a single sound. No footsteps, no movement, no sign that anyone had ever been there. I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe someone had been walking down the road at just the right moment. Maybe they were messing with me. Maybe it was a neighbor. But none of it added up. The road was too quiet, too empty, and the voice hadn't sounded like someone passing by. It sounded like someone standing still, listening. I went back inside and locked the front door, then every other door in the house. I closed and locked the windows, including the one behind the couch, my hands shaking as I did it. The house suddenly felt too open, too exposed, like I had unknowingly invited something inside just by sitting there comfortably. I turned the TV volume up, but it didn't help. Every sound made me jump. The hum of the air conditioner, the creak of the floor, even my own breathing felt too loud. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my head, the timing of it, the clarity of the voice, the way it responded naturally, like it was something people say without thinking. That's what bothered me the most. There was no hesitation, no pause, just an immediate automatic bless you, as if whoever said it had been waiting for something to react to, as if they were aware of me the entire time I'd been sitting there watching TV, completely unaware of their presence. I tried to convince myself it wasn't a big deal. I told myself I had probably imagined it, or misheard something from the TV, or that my brain had filled in the sound automatically because it expected it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew the difference between a thought and a voice, and that had been a voice, clear, human, and right outside my window. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing outside the house, waiting quietly, listening. I kept picturing a figure just beyond the reach of the porch light, perfectly still. I woke up multiple times, convinced I heard movement outside, only to find nothing when I checked. In the days that followed, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. I stopped opening the windows at night, no matter how hot it got. I double-checked locks before sitting down. I listened carefully any time I heard a sound outside, even during the day. That sense of safety I'd had before was gone, or replaced by a constant awareness that being alone doesn't always mean being unobserved. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Not because something else happened afterward, but because nothing did. There was no explanation, no confirmation, no resolution. Just a moment that shattered the feeling of privacy and safety I'd taken for granted. What scares me most isn't the idea of something supernatural. It's the possibility that someone was there, close enough to speak, and close enough to leave without being seen or heard. That kind of quiet presence is far more unsettling than anything dramatic or obvious. To this day, whenever I sneeze while I'm alone, especially at night, there's a brief pause afterward where I hold my breath and wait. I don't even realize I'm doing it sometimes. I just listen, tense, hoping not to hear a response that shouldn't be there. Because once you hear a stranger speak to you from the darkness outside your own home, you never fully feel alone the same way again. I was in 5th grade at the time, around 11 years old, and it was one of those regular school days that didn't feel important until later, when it became something I'd never forget. I came home from school somewhere around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was still out, the neighborhood looked normal, and nothing felt off while I was walking home. My parents were in the city that day, so I knew I'd be home alone for a while. That wasn't unusual. I'd done it before, and even though I didn't love being alone, it never scared me enough to think twice about it. As I walked up to my house, everything looked the same as always. The front yard was quiet, the street was empty, and there were no cars in the driveway. I remember reaching into my backpack to grab my keys, already thinking about going inside, dropping my stuff, and doing whatever kids do when they have the house to themselves. There was nothing dramatic about that moment. It was calm in the way afternoons usually are. I stepped up onto the porch and moved toward the front door. I hadn't unlocked it yet. I was still standing outside, right in front of it, when something happened that stopped me cold. Out of nowhere, I heard footsteps. Not light footsteps, not slow ones. They were heavy, loud, and fast. It sounded like someone was running full speed inside the room, directly behind the front door, charging straight toward where I was standing. The sound came so suddenly and with so much force that my brain didn't have time to question it. It didn't sound like someone walking. It didn't sound like the house settling. It sounded angry, aggressive, and intentional. I didn't see anyone. There was no shadow under the door, no movement through the window, just the sound of those footsteps pounding hard against the floor, rushing toward me, as if whoever or whatever was making them knew exactly where I was standing. For a split second, I was frozen. My heart slammed into my chest, and my entire body went cold. I remember thinking very clearly that someone was about to open the door, that someone was right there on the other side, about to reach it. And then instinct took over. I didn't unlock the door. I didn't knock. I didn't stop to think logically or tell myself I was imagining it. I turned around and ran. I ran as fast as I could, faster than I ever had before. I didn't look back. I didn't care if I dropped anything or tripped. All I knew was that I needed to get away from that house. I was 11 years old, terrified, and my only thought was to put distance between myself and whatever was inside. My friend lived about 2 houses down. I sprinted straight there, lungs burning, heart racing, adrenaline flooding my system. When I reached his house, I practically threw myself at the door. His mom answered, and the moment she saw my face, she knew something was wrong. I must have looked completely panicked because she didn't ask me to calm down first. She just let me in and asked what happened. I tried to explain through shaky breaths. I told her that I'd gone to unlock my front door and heard someone running inside the house toward me. I told her how loud it was, how close it sounded, how real it felt. My friend stood there listening, clearly confused but also unsettled. His mom didn't laugh or brush it off. She looked concerned, genuinely concerned, which somehow made it feel even more real. She told me to sit down and calm down while she called my parents. I remember sitting there, still shaking, replaying the sound of those footsteps over and over in my head. No matter how many times I thought about it, I couldn't explain it. There was no reason anyone should have been in the house. The doors were locked, the windows were closed. My parents hadn't mentioned anyone stopping by. When my parents got the call, they came back as soon as they could. I stayed at my friend's house until they arrived. By the time they picked me up, the fear had dulled a little, but it was still there, sitting heavy in my stomach. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to see that door again. But eventually we did. When we got home, everything looked normal. Too normal. My dad went inside first and checked the entire house. Every room, every closet, under the beds, behind doors. There was no one there. He checked the attic too, carefully, shining a light into every corner. Nothing. No signs of anyone breaking in. No open windows. No disturbed furniture. Nothing out of place at all. My parents tried to reassure me. They said maybe I heard something else. Maybe it was the house making noise, or someone outside, or my imagination getting the better of me. But even as they spoke, I could tell they didn't fully understand it either. The way I described the sound didn't match something simple or explainable. What bothered me the most was how clear it had been. It wasn't faint, it wasn't distant, it wasn't something I had to strain to hear. It sounded like someone running directly at me, from inside my own house with heavy, deliberate steps. That kind of sound doesn't just come from nowhere. To this day, I still don't know what happened. There was never any explanation, no follow-up incident, no evidence that someone had been inside. But I know what I heard, and I know how real it felt in that moment. Even now, years later, the memory still gives me chills. I can still hear those footsteps in my head if I think about it too long. That was about 4 years ago. Nothing like that has happened since, but it changed how I feel about being alone. It changed how I listen to sounds in quiet houses. Even now, when I walk up to a door and hear something on the other side, my body reacts before my brain does. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't seeing something. It's hearing it coming straight for you and having no idea what it is. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. I've always been someone who scares easily. Even small noises in the house can make my heart race or set me on edge. Over the past few months, there's been something in my home that has tested that tendency more than anything else ever has. It started subtly at first, just a feeling that something was off when I was alone in certain rooms. Then I began hearing something I couldn't explain. At first it was barely noticeable, almost like a faint hiss of air or someone breathing quietly in the distance. But soon it became more distinct. Heavy breathing, deliberate and slow, almost as if someone was pacing around the house while I was in a room by myself. The worst part wasn't just hearing it, it was that I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Whenever I tried to focus to pinpoint its location, the sound would shift. Slowly, almost teasingly, it would seem to move to another part of the house. Sometimes it would sound like it was right outside the door, and a second later it would be coming from the hallway behind me, or upstairs, or somewhere I couldn't immediately access. It never got loud, never aggressive, but it was deliberate, like it was aware I was listening. It was subtle, quiet, and invasive all at once. My brain immediately started rationalizing, telling myself it was probably my imagination. I tried to convince myself that it was the house settling, or the furnace, or my own hearing playing tricks on me. I clung to the idea that it had to be a mental thing because, logically, there was no one else in the house. Still, the fear lingered, creeping under my skin whenever it happened. The first time it happened, and I had just gotten home from a long day and was trying to unwind. I had left all the windows open because it was summer, and a warm breeze drifted through the house. Everything seemed perfectly normal. I was sitting in the living room with a cup of tea when I noticed a faint sound, almost like a soft exhale coming from the hallway. At first I ignored it, thinking it was a vent or the air conditioning, but when I tilted my head and tried to listen, the sound seemed to shift slightly toward the staircase. My body stiffened and my heart rate spiked. I waited, frozen in place, trying to tell myself it was nothing, but then I realized I could hear it again, closer this time, as if someone or something was moving softly across the floor. I got up and started checking the rooms, opening doors slowly and quietly, trying to convince myself that I would see a person. The house was empty. Every door, every window, every corner was as it should be. My cat, who was usually skittish, didn't react at all. There was no draft or sound coming from outside. The noise had disappeared, just as mysteriously as it had arrived. I sat back down, heart still racing, and tried to calm myself with deep breaths, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, or at least that someone or something was aware of me. After that night, the sound became more frequent. Sometimes it would come late at night when the house was completely silent. Other times, it would happen during the day when I was sitting in the kitchen, washing dishes, or on the couch, scrolling through my phone. It never sounded the same twice. Some nights it would start low, almost like a whisper of breath, and gradually grow heavier. Other times it was abrupt, starting suddenly in one corner of the house and ending just as quickly in another. I would follow the sound, pacing from room to room, only to find nothing. Sometimes the sound would retreat as I approached, as if it was aware I was listening, aware I was trying to catch it. The fear became more physical over time. My heart would pound in my chest whenever I heard it. I would start shaking, my palms sweaty and my stomach in knots. I stopped going into certain rooms alone, leaving lights on even during the day. I would call out, trying to convince myself it was a person and that I could make them stop, but my voice always echoed back empty. The most unnerving part was that the sound never made sense. It didn't belong to anything I could identify. Oh, I'm used to hearing my dogs breathing, the refrigerator humming, or the wind rattling the window panes, but this was different. It was deliberate, intentional. It felt alive. I started keeping track of when it happened. I realized it often occurred during moments of stress, after a long day, or when I was exhausted. My mind was already on edge, and I wondered if my own anxiety was amplifying it. That thought helped a little, but only for a moment. Rationalizing it as a mental phenomenon didn't stop my stomach from flipping when I heard it in the hallway at 2 a.m., or my hair standing on end when it seemed to drift from the kitchen to the living room in a single breath. I experimented with ways to make it stop. I played music and left the television on to fill the silence, hoping it would mask the sound or make it less noticeable. Sometimes it helped, other times it didn't, and I would hear the breathing even through the noise, faint but insistent. I tried grounding techniques, focusing on what I could see, touching objects in the room, counting tiles on the floor. That worked occasionally, bringing a sense of calm. But the second I relaxed, it would start again, always moving, always present, though never visible. I even considered practical explanations. I checked the vents, inspected the attic, looked for drafts or loose boards. Everything was secure. I even asked a friend who lived nearby if they had noticed anything strange, but no one had. The house was perfectly normal on the surface, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't empty, that something was aware of me in a way that defied logic. After months of this, I began accepting a harsh truth. I might not be able to get rid of it. Maybe it wasn't about fixing anything external. Maybe it was something I needed to live with, something that existed in the space between my perception and reality. That thought was terrifying at first, but it also helped me approach it differently. Instead of chasing it or trying to prove it was real or imagined, I learned to focus on myself. I kept a routine, lights on in the rooms I spent the most time in, and music or white noise in the background. I learned to remind myself that I was safe, that nothing in the house had ever hurt me, and that it probably wasn't a tangible being at all. Even now, the sound still comes sometimes. Late at night, when the house is silent, I hear it. Heavy, deliberate breathing that I cannot locate. And yet, it has taught me something about myself. I've learned to face fear that is intangible, that cannot be touched or confronted directly. I've learned that sometimes just acknowledging it, keeping calm, and reminding yourself that you are safe is enough to survive it. I still get startled, still feel the panic when it shifts across the rooms, but I don't run anymore. I don't hide. I let it exist, even as I continue to try to understand it. I tell myself it might all be mental, that my brain is exaggerating sounds, inventing patterns, creating presence where there is none. That's probably true. And yet, for some reason, calling it a mental phenomenon doesn't fully calm the instinctive terror it creates. There's a part of me that can't ignore it. A part of me that still flinches when I hear a breath behind me that doesn't belong to anyone in the house. And I suppose that's okay, because even if it is entirely in my mind, it feels real enough to demand attention, to remind me that fear is sometimes unavoidable, and learning to live with it can be its own form of strength. About a year and a half ago, my sister and I were home alone. It wasn't unusual for us. Our parents trusted us, and we had spent plenty of afternoons and evenings by ourselves without anything strange ever happening. That day felt normal in every possible way. Nothing about it stood out. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels safe because you've lived in it long enough to know every sound it usually makes. At some point, I decided to go upstairs and take a nap. I was tired in that heavy, dull way where sleep feels unavoidable. My room was at the end of the hall, and I had a loft bed with a ladder built into the frame. I climbed up, settled in, and fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I woke up, but it wasn't sudden or panicked. It was the slow kind of waking, where you're still half lost in dreams and not fully aware of your surroundings yet. What pulled me out of sleep was the feeling of my bed moving. At first I thought I was imagining it, the way you sometimes do when you're drifting between asleep and awake. But then it happened again, a clear shift in weight, the unmistakable shake of someone climbing up the ladder attached to my bed. Still half asleep, my brain immediately filled in the most logical explanation. It had to be my sister. She messed with me all the time, and climbing up my ladder to annoy me wouldn't have been out of character. Without opening my eyes, I muttered something like, "Piss off," my voice thick with sleep. I lazily kicked in the general direction of the ladder, not hard, just enough to let her know I was awake and not in the mood. That's when my foot hit something. It wasn't the metal rung of the ladder, it wasn't the wooden frame. It was a hand. The moment my foot made contact, the hand pulled away sharply, as if startled. That alone should have fully woken me up, but my brain still refused to accept that something was wrong. Almost immediately after, I heard my sister's voice, clear as day, right below me. "Oh, sorry," she said. "I didn't realize you were awake." Her tone was casual, completely normal, like she was embarrassed about getting caught messing with me. I heard the soft sound of footsteps moving away from the ladder, then the door opening, and finally the creak of the stairs as she walked back downstairs. Everything about it felt ordinary, too ordinary. I rolled over, annoyed that my nap had been interrupted, and stared at the wall for a few minutes. I'm trying to fall back asleep. But something about the interaction didn't sit right. The more awake I became, the more a strange unease settled in my chest. After about 5 minutes, I climbed down from the bed and went downstairs to find my sister. I wanted to ask her why she'd bothered climbing up just to leave immediately. I expected to find her in the living room or the kitchen, maybe pretending nothing had happened. Instead, I found her sitting downstairs, exactly where she'd been earlier, watching TV. I asked her why she had come into my room. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. She told me she hadn't been upstairs at all. She said she'd been downstairs the entire time. She never went near my room. She never climbed the ladder. She never touched my bed. The room felt colder instantly. I laughed at first, assuming she was messing with me, but she didn't laugh back. She swore she was telling the truth. She described exactly what she had been watching on TV, what time it was, and what she'd been doing while I was asleep. There was no hesitation in her voice, no hint of a joke. That's when the fear really set in. We went back upstairs together to check my room. Nothing was out of place. The ladder was still. The bed was steady. There were no signs that anyone else had been there. No open windows, no open doors, no explanation. We didn't want to be upstairs anymore. We took blankets and pillows and stayed in the basement until our dad got home. Neither of us said much. We just sat there, listening to the sounds of the house, jumping at every creak and pop. The basement felt safer, like being closer to the ground somehow offered protection. When our dad got home, we told him everything. He checked the house, every room, every closet, every door. He found nothing. He tried to reassure us, said it was probably a dream, or sleep paralysis, or our minds playing tricks on us. I wanted to believe that explanation. I really did. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the supernatural. I've always believed that everything has a logical explanation, even if we don't immediately understand it. But things didn't stop after that. Every so often, we would hear someone calling our names. It didn't happen often enough to feel predictable, but often enough that we couldn't ignore it. The voice always sounded familiar, perfectly familiar. Sometimes it sounded like my sister. Sometimes it sounded like me. The worst part was how accurate it was. It didn't sound distorted or strange. It didn't echo or whisper. It sounded exactly like us, down to the tone, the pacing, even the way we said each other's names. If I heard my name, I would be absolutely certain my sister had called me. And when she heard her name, she was just as convinced it was me. Every time, when we asked the other person if they had said anything, the answer was always no. It never called us both at the same time. It always separated us, always making sure the voice sounded like it was coming from the other person. That made it worse somehow, like it knew exactly how to get our attention. We tried to ignore it. We told ourselves it was the house settling or sounds carrying strangely through the walls. But deep down, we both knew that wasn't true. Houses don't replicate voices. They don't apologize in familiar tones. They don't pull their hands away when touched. What stays with me the most isn't the sound of the voice or the fear we felt afterward. It's the moment my foot touched that hand. The instant reaction. The way it withdrew like it knew it had been caught. Like it understood it wasn't supposed to be there. Whatever it was, it knew how to sound like us. It knew how to move like us. It knew how to walk away calmly, like it belonged. And the worst part is that we never felt like it left. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl, not because I believe it was something paranormal, but because I can't explain it. And sometimes, not having an explanation is far more terrifying than believing in ghosts ever could be. To this day, when I hear my name called and no one is around, I don't answer right away. I listen first. I make sure it's real. Because once you've experienced something that can perfectly copy you, you never fully trust what you hear again. When I was a kid, sleep never came easily to me. I was one of those children who could lie in bed for hours with my eyes wide open, listening to the house settle and creak, watching shadows stretch across the ceiling. Night felt alive in a way daytime never did. My mind would race over nothing in particular, just a steady stream of thoughts that refused to quiet down. My mom was the same way. She'd always joked that we were wired wrong, that our clocks were flipped compared to everyone else. While other families were deep asleep by 10, our house still felt awake well past midnight. Because of that, late nights were normal for us. I'd sit in the living room with the lights low, the glow of the TV flickering across the walls while my mom did her usual nighttime routine. There was something comforting about those quiet hours. The world outside felt distant. No cars, no voices, just the hum of appliances and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere down the street. It felt like we had borrowed a private slice of time. One evening during the summer, my mom mentioned something strange. She said she'd been hearing footsteps upstairs at night. Not random bumps or old house noises, but footsteps. Clear, paced, deliberate. She didn't say it dramatically. She wasn't trying to scare me. If anything, she sounded puzzled, like she'd been trying to solve a math problem that didn't add up. She asked if I'd stay up and listen with her. Since I was already a professional insomniac at that age and school was out, I agreed without thinking much of it. That night stretched on like any other. The clock ticked past midnight. The air felt thick and warm in that summer way where everything seems to move slower. Around 1 in the morning, my mom said it usually happened when she was brushing her teeth. She told me to sit quietly in the living room and just listen. No TV, no talking, just listen. Then she walked down the hallway toward the bathroom. The second the house settled into silence, I became hyper-aware of every tiny sound. The refrigerator clicked on, pipes murmured in the walls. My own breathing suddenly sounded too loud. For a minute I thought maybe this was all in her head, that we'd sit there and hear nothing and laugh it off. Then it started. At first it was faint, almost easy to dismiss. A soft thump from upstairs. Then another, and another. My whole body went still. They were footsteps, not creaks, not random settling. They had rhythm. You could map them in your head as they moved. I remember staring at the ceiling, my ears straining, my skin prickling like it does when you realize you're not imagining something. The steps seemed to begin near the window in my parents' bedroom. That room was directly above the living room, so I could picture exactly where the sound was coming from. The footsteps moved slowly across the carpet, muffled but steady, heading toward the hallway. When they reached the top of the stairs, the sound changed. The landing was hardwood, and suddenly the steps were sharp and clear. Each one tapped through the house like a knock. Then they softened again as they moved back onto carpet, heading toward my baby sister's room. I could trace the path perfectly without seeing a thing. Window, hall, landing, sister's room. The part that chilled me wasn't just that something was walking. It was the pause. When the steps reached my sister's crib, they stopped. Completely. The silence hung there for a few seconds that felt much longer. I remember my chest tightening as I stared at the ceiling, imagining something standing over her crib in the dark. Then the steps started again, retracing the exact same path back toward my parents' window. It didn't happen once. It kept repeating, back and forth, window to crib, crib to window. Each trip took about a minute. Slow, measured. Like whoever was walking had nowhere else to be. I sat there listening for what felt like forever, though it was probably 5 or 10 minutes. My brain kept trying to invent explanations. Maybe it was the house next door. Maybe sound was traveling weirdly. Maybe one of the dogs had gotten upstairs somehow, but the pattern was too precise, too human. Every time the steps hit the hardwood landing, they rang out clearly, impossible to mistake for anything else. When my mum came out of the bathroom, she didn't look surprised to see my face. I must have looked pale. She just said quietly, "I told you I heard something." Hearing her confirm it made it real in a way it hadn't been a second before. It wasn't just my imagination feeding on darkness. We were both hearing it. We stood there for a moment, listening together. The footsteps continued their slow route overhead. Finally, my mom walked to the front door and opened it. The cool night air spilled in, and at that exact moment the footsteps stopped. Not faded, not slowed, stopped, like a switch had been flipped. The silence afterward felt heavier than the noise had. We didn't hear anything else that night. I remember lying in bed wide awake, replaying the sound over and over in my head, trying to convince myself there was a normal explanation. Houses make noise, old floors shift. But no matter how I twisted it, I couldn't make random noise follow that same path again and again, with that same deliberate pacing. The next night, curiosity overpowered fear. I wanted to know if it would happen again. Around the same time, I took my spot in the living room and waited. Sure enough, a little after 1, the footsteps returned. Same route, same rhythm. It was like listening to a recording replay itself. This time, I decided to act. We had 2 dogs, a German Shepherd and a Border Collie, both fearless in the way only big family dogs can be. I opened the door at the bottom of the stairs and sent them up. They charged halfway up like they normally would, nails clicking against the wood. Then they froze. I'll never forget that moment. Both dogs stood rigid at the top of the stairs, staring into the darkness of the hallway. Their ears were pinned back. Without a sound, they turned around and bolted back down the stairs so fast they nearly tripped over each other. They didn't bark. They didn't growl. They just ran. I'd never seen them react like that to anything. My stepdad was home that night. The second the dogs came tearing down, he rushed upstairs. He flicked on every light, opened every door, checked every closet, every corner. He even looked under beds and behind furniture. There was nowhere to hide up there, and he searched like he expected to find an intruder. But there was nothing. No open windows, no signs of forced entry. Everything was locked tight, and yet we'd all heard it. For a long time we didn't talk about it much. The footsteps eventually stopped, or maybe we just stopped listening. Life has a way of layering normal days over strange memories until they feel distant. But every now and then, late at night, I'd remember the sound of those steps crossing the landing and feel that same cold ripple run through me. Years later, after we'd moved out, new neighbors settled into the house. Somehow the topic came up in conversation. They mentioned hearing footsteps upstairs at night, the same route, the same pacing. When they described it, my stomach dropped like I was a kid again staring at the ceiling. We hadn't told them anything about our experience. There was no reason they would invent the exact same story. I still don't have an explanation. I've tried to build one 100 times. Old houses shift. Sound travels in strange ways. Animals can make noises that mimic footsteps. But none of those explanations line up neatly with what we heard, or the way the dogs reacted, or the neighbors confirming it years later. What stays with me most isn't the fear, it's the clarity of it. The memory is sharp, untouched by time. I can still hear the rhythm of those steps if I let myself think about it too long. Slow, patient, back and forth in the dark, like something keeping a routine we were never meant to notice. I don't jump to ghost stories. I don't claim we were haunted. I just know that for a stretch of nights in that house, something walked upstairs when no one was there. We listened to it. The dogs ran from it. And when we opened the door, it stopped like it knew we were listening. That's the part I can never explain, no matter how many years pass. And some nights, when the house I live in now creaks just right, I still find myself holding my breath, waiting to hear footsteps that aren't supposed to be there. I was home alone that night, and everything felt normal at first. It was quiet in the way rented apartments usually are late at night, where the silence feels thin, like it could tear if something moved too suddenly. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was late enough that the building had settled. No voices through the walls, no footsteps in the hallway, just that familiar stillness that makes you feel like the place belongs only to you for a few hours. I was in my room when I heard it, the sound of running water. At first it didn't scare me. It was one of those small, everyday noises that barely registers, the kind your brain immediately explains away. I assumed I'd left the bathroom tap running by accident. I'd gone in there earlier, probably half asleep, and it wouldn't have been the first time I forgot to turn it off all the way. I remember feeling slightly annoyed at myself more than anything else, so I got up and walked to the bathroom. The light was off when I entered, but the sound was clear. The tap was fully open, water rushing into the sink like it had been running for a while. I stepped closer, reached out and turned it off. The sudden silence felt heavier than it should have, but again I didn't think much of it. I just stood there for a second, making sure it was completely closed, watching the last drops fall into the drain. Then I turned around to go back to my room. I had taken maybe 2 steps when I heard it again. The tap turned back on. Not slowly, not with a drip that built up. It was instant, like someone had twisted it open in one sharp movement. The sound of water filled the bathroom behind me, loud and undeniable. I froze. Every logical explanation I'd had just a moment earlier disappeared. There was no delay, no hesitation, no time for pressure changes or faulty pipes to explain it away. I hadn't even left the doorway yet. The bathroom was still right there behind me. I didn't turn around. I don't know why, but something deep in my gut told me not to look. My heart started racing, and I could feel that cold, crawling feeling moving up my spine. I walked back into my room as calmly as I could manage, closed the door, and locked it. That night, I slept with the lights on, or at least I tried to sleep. Every small noise made me flinch. Every shift in the building sounded too loud, too close. That was the night I started believing the apartment might actually be haunted. Over time, things only got worse. Furniture would move on its own. Not dramatically, not flying across the room like in movies, but just enough to make you doubt yourself. A chair that wasn't quite where you left it. A table angled differently than you remembered. At first, I blamed my memory. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. But it kept happening, and it always happened when I was alone. Then there were the sounds from the kitchen. I remember one evening hearing metal clattering from down the hall, sharp and hollow, like someone rummaging through drawers too fast. It sounded like forks and knives being shifted around, hitting each other in that unmistakable way cutlery does. I stood still, listening, my breath shallow, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the building settling, maybe vibrations from another apartment. Eventually, curiosity and fear pushed me to check. When I walked into the kitchen, every drawer was open. Not just cracked or slightly pulled out, fully open. The cutlery inside was a mess, scattered and disorganized, as if someone had been digging through it without care. I stood there staring at it, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. I hadn't been in the kitchen in hours. I knew I hadn't left it like that. I closed the drawers with shaking hands, listening to the soft thuds echo through the apartment. That echo felt wrong, like the sound traveled too far, lingered too long. After that, I started noticing smaller things, sounds that didn't have a clear source. A feeling of being watched when I moved from room to room. The air in certain parts of the apartment felt heavier, colder, especially at night. The bathroom, in particular, always made my skin prickle. I avoided it as much as I could unless I absolutely had to go in there. What made it worse was knowing it was a rented place. There was no comfort in familiarity, no sense of history I could hold on to. Other people had lived there before me, and I had no idea what they experienced. No idea what they might have left behind, intentionally or not. Every noise felt like a reminder that this place wasn't truly mine, and maybe never had been. I tried to rationalize everything. I told myself old buildings make noise. Pipes act up, floors shift. But deep down, I knew those explanations didn't fit everything, especially not the way the tap turned back on, especially not the drawers. Eventually I moved out. I didn't feel sad about leaving. I didn't miss the place. If anything, I felt relief, like I could finally breathe again without waiting for something else to happen. To this day, I still think about whoever rented that apartment after me. I wonder if they noticed the same things, if they heard the same sounds, if they ever stood in the bathroom doorway, heart pounding, afraid to turn around. I hope they didn't, but part of me suspects they did. This happened a while back, and even now I still think about it more often than I probably should. I'm not someone who jumps straight to supernatural explanations. I like logic. I like things to make sense. That's probably why this night stuck with me so deeply, because no matter how many times I replay it, I still don't have a solid answer for what actually happened. It started around 12:45 in the morning. I was asleep, dead asleep, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first I ignored it, then it buzzed again and again. I finally rolled over, half awake, squinting at the screen. It was notifications from my Ring doorbell. Motion detected, motion detected, motion detected. At that point I wasn't alarmed. The motion range on my doorbell is pretty tight. It mostly only picks up movement directly in front of the door. Occasionally, a big bug will set it off, a moth maybe. Florida-sized insects are basically small birds anyway, so I brushed it off. I told myself it was nothing and rolled over trying to go back to sleep. About 45 minutes later, at 1:30 a.m., the actual doorbell rang. That snapped me awake instantly. There's a big difference between motion notifications and the physical doorbell ringing. Motion can be anything. But the doorbell, that requires pressure. Someone has to actually push it. Still, my first reaction was confusion more than fear. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it rang by accident. Technology does weird things sometimes. My phone lit up again with motion alerts, one after another. I sat up in bed, heart beating faster now, and opened the app. The camera feed loaded. The porch was empty. No person, no shadow, no movement. I stared at the screen for a while, waiting to see something move. Nothing did. The feed stayed still. The porch light illuminated the same empty space it always did. I waited another minute, then closed the app and told myself to calm down. Weird, sure, but not impossible. Maybe a bug hit it just right. Maybe the app lagged. I tried to laugh it off and lay back down. That lasted less than an hour. At 2:20 a.m., the doorbell rang again. Then it rang again. Immediately after, my phone exploded with notifications. Motion detected. Motion detected. Motion detected. They kept coming, one after another, close enough together that my phone barely stopped vibrating. This time, fear crept in fast. My chest tightened, and I felt that cold, sinking feeling in my stomach that you get when something feels very wrong, but you don't know why yet. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone, imagining the worst. My brain immediately went to the creepiest possible image. Someone standing just outside my door. Someone wearing a mask. Someone staring directly into the camera, waiting for me to look. I almost didn't want to open the app, afraid of what I might see. Eventually, curiosity and anxiety won. I opened the live feed. Nothing. Again, the porch was completely empty. No movement, no person. No sign that anyone had been there at all. The motion alerts kept coming anyway, over and over. The doorbell stopped ringing, but the motion notifications continued in waves. I sat there, frozen, listening to every sound in the house. Every creak of the walls felt amplified. Every distant noise made my heart jump. This went on for hours. The motion alerts didn't stop. They weren't constant, but they came in clusters, a burst of notifications, then a short pause, then another burst. Every time I thought it was over, my phone would buzz again. I checked the app repeatedly, each time hoping to finally see something that explained it. Each time, the porch was empty. Around 4 a.m., the doorbell finally stopped ringing entirely. The motion alerts slowed down, but didn't completely stop. By then, I was exhausted. My nerves felt fried. I had been lying in bed for hours, wide awake, staring at my phone and listening to the silence. At some point, exhaustion won, and I finally drifted off. When I woke up a few hours later, the first thing I did was grab my phone. Hundreds of notifications. Motion alerts stacked one after another, grouped in clusters with gaps of about 15 to 30 minutes between them. It had been happening almost non-stop while I slept. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through them. I immediately tried to check the video history to see what had been triggering it. That's when I realized my cloud storage subscription had lapsed. There was no footage, no history, no recordings, nothing I could review to see what was happening outside my door all night long, just timestamps and motion alerts with no explanation. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling sick. If there had been someone there, I would never know. If there had been nothing, I had no proof of that either. Later that day, once it was fully light out, I went outside to inspect the doorbell. I stood on the porch, staring at it like it might suddenly explain itself. I tested it. You have to press it firmly to make it ring. It's not sensitive. It doesn't go off from vibrations or light touches. You really have to push it in. I'd never had this issue before. I barely even get motion alerts normally. Bugs don't usually trigger it. Wind doesn't trigger it. It's pretty reliable, which is why that night bothered me so much. It wasn't acting the way it normally did. It wasn't reacting to random movement the way cheap sensors sometimes do. It was acting like something was repeatedly triggering it, deliberately. I walked around the front of the house, checking for anything that could have caused false alerts. Tree branches, loose decorations, anything. There was nothing. No obvious explanation. No damage. No signs of someone being there. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it was a software issue. Maybe something was wrong with the sensor for one night and then fixed itself. All of those are possible, but none of them explain the physical doorbell ringing multiple times. None of them explain why it happened for hours and then never again. None of them explain why it triggered so intensely when it barely ever does otherwise. What unsettles me the most is the timing, the gaps, the way it would stop and start again, like something coming and going, like something lingering just outside the range of the camera, stepping in and out. I hate that thought and I try not to dwell on it, but it's hard not to. Since then, every time my phone buzzes late at night with a notification, my heart jumps a little. Every time I hear the doorbell ring unexpectedly, I feel that same cold rush of fear. I renewed my cloud storage immediately after that. I don't want to ever be in a position again where something happens and I have no way of seeing it. Nothing like that has happened since. No random ringing, no endless motion alerts, no unexplained activity. The doorbell has worked exactly as it should. That almost makes it worse. If it were broken, if it kept malfunctioning, I could point to that and say, there's the problem. But it didn't. It worked perfectly before. It worked perfectly after. Just not that night. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and my phone is face down on the nightstand, I still think about how close someone would have had to be to trigger that doorbell. How close they would have been to my door. How close they would have been to me while I lay there in the dark staring at notifications and imagining what I might see if I looked. The worst part isn't that I don't know what it was. The worst part is knowing that whatever it was, it never showed itself. A few years ago, I decided to take my bike down to the beach trails that had just opened near my town. They were brand new at the time, carved deep into the woods and stretching all the way toward the next town over. Everyone was talking about how nice they were, how peaceful it felt riding out there, so I figured I'd spend the afternoon exploring them. I remember being in a good mood when I started. It was one of those warm days where the air smells like salt and pine at the same time, and the sky is bright but not blinding. The entrance to the trail looked inviting enough. A narrow path cutting into the trees, sunlight flickering through leaves. Once I got moving, it felt great. The dirt was packed down just right, smooth enough to ride fast, but still natural. For the first few minutes, I didn't see anyone else. No walkers, or no other bikers. Just me and the sound of my tires humming over the trail. After a while, I stopped to take a drink of water. The second I stopped moving, the mosquitoes found me. It was like I had flipped a switch. They swarmed instantly, whining in my ears, landing on my arms, my neck, my face. I slapped at them and muttered to myself, thinking maybe I should just turn back. But when I was riding, they hadn't bothered me at all. As long as I kept moving, I figured I'd be fine. So I took another quick drink, hopped back on, and pedaled harder to get away from the cloud of them. The trail twisted deeper into the woods. The beach wasn't far off, and you could smell the ocean every time the wind shifted. After about 30 minutes, I hit the first big sandpit. A lot of the paths out there ran close to dunes, so sections of the trail were just long stretches of loose sand. Riding straight through it was almost impossible unless you wanted to wipe out. Luckily, the edges of this one were packed down where other riders had cut around it. I steered onto the side and kept going, tires wobbling but holding. That's when I saw her. Up ahead, maybe 100 yards away, was a woman pushing a stroller. The sight of her immediately felt out of place. I had been riding for a while and hadn't seen a single other person. This stretch of trail was pretty deep in the woods, far from any parking lot. Seeing anyone out there would have been unusual. Seeing a woman trying to push a stroller through sand felt almost surreal. She was struggling with it. The stroller wheels kept sinking, and she had to jerk it forward in short bursts. She wasn't even trying to use the packed edge like I was. She was forcing it straight down the middle of the sand. I remember thinking it must be exhausting. The mosquitoes were still thick in the air too. I could see them swirling around her. I stayed to the side and kept approaching, planning to pass her carefully. When I got maybe 100 feet away, she suddenly stopped. With one hand still gripping the stroller, she stretched her other arm straight out toward the side of the path I was using. At first, I assumed she was just being cautious, trying to make sure I didn't clip her or the stroller as I went by. It was awkward but not threatening, just strange. I squeezed past her outstretched arm, giving as much room as I could. I didn't look at her face. I just focused on not crashing in the sand. Once I was past, I picked up speed and kept going. The encounter stuck in my head as odd, but not enough to stop me. People are weird sometimes, that's what I told myself. The trail went on for a while, quiet except for the insects and the distant crash of waves. Then I hit another sandpit. This one was massive. There was no packed edge, no easy way around. Just a long, soft stretch that swallowed my front tire the second I tried to enter it. I put a foot down and stared at it, debating whether to walk my bike across. It looked miserable. And the second I stopped, the mosquitoes descended again in full force. They were relentless, landing in my hair, biting through my shirt. I lasted maybe 10 seconds before giving up. There was no way I was walking through that sand while being eaten alive. So I turned my bike around and started riding back the way I came. As I pedaled, I thought about the woman. If the mosquitoes were this bad for me, she must have been getting destroyed, and pushing that stroller through sand on top of it. I wondered how far she planned to go. The image of her struggling stuck with me. It felt wrong to just leave her out there without saying anything about the giant sandpit ahead. Eventually I rounded a bend and saw her again in the distance, coming toward me this time. Relief mixed with unease. Good, I thought. I'll just warn her. She'll probably turn back. The closer I got, the more details came into focus, and that's when the feeling in my stomach changed. Her dress looked shredded. It wasn't torn in one place. It was in strips, hanging off her like it had been dragged through thorns over and over. The fabric barely clung to her body. My eyes dropped to the stroller automatically, expecting to see a baby bundled inside. It was empty. She was pushing an empty stroller through the woods. I slowed, without meaning to. My brain tried to explain it away. Maybe she had taken the baby out. Maybe it was a doll, something I just couldn't see from here. But the seat was flat. Nothing in it. No blanket, no bag, nothing. She stopped moving. Her head snapped up and locked onto me. Even from a distance I could see her expression. Her eyes were stretched open so wide that the whites showed all around her irises. Her mouth hung open in a stiff grin, teeth fully exposed. It wasn't a smile. It was like her face had been pulled into the shape of one and frozen there. Then she leaned sideways and extended her arm again. Not casually, not like someone making space. She stretched it toward me with a slow, deliberate motion, fingers spread wide. The angle of her body made it look like she was reaching to grab something, not avoid a collision. A cold wave ran through me. Every instinct I had started screaming that something was wrong. I glanced behind me, thinking about turning around, but the giant sandpit was still back there. If I got stuck in that sand and she was actually chasing me, I'd be trapped. I made a split decision. There was just enough room to slip past her arm if I hugged the edge. I gripped the handlebars so tight my hands hurt and started pedaling as hard as I could. As I got closer, she didn't move out of the way. She held the stroller with one hand and kept reaching with the other, tracking me with those huge, unblinking eyes. The grin never changed. Not even a twitch. The mosquitoes swarmed around her face, and she didn't react at all. I shot past her at full speed. Her fingers missed my arm by what felt like inches. For a split second I smelled something rotten, like wet leaves and decay. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just pedaled. Every sound behind me felt like footsteps. Every rustle in the trees felt like her dropping the stroller and running. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. The trail blurred. Branches whipped past my shoulders. I rode like something was chasing me, even if I couldn't hear it. The woods seemed endless on the way out. The light looked different, darker somehow, like the trees were closing in. I kept expecting to feel a hand on my back or see her in front of me around the next bend. I didn't slow down. My legs burned, but I pushed harder. When I finally burst out of the tree line and saw the open sky near the beach entrance, the relief hit me so hard I almost crashed. I didn't stop until I was out in the parking area, surrounded by cars and people. Normal sounds, normal voices. I bent over my bike, gasping, trying to calm down. I told myself I had overreacted, that she was just a disturbed person, someone having a mental break. The empty stroller didn't mean anything. The dress was probably old and ripped. My fear had filled in the rest. But even now, years later, I can still see her face exactly as it was. The stretched grin, the eyes that didn't blink, the way her arm reached with absolute intention. And the part that stays with me the most is the certainty I felt in that moment. Not confusion, not curiosity. Certainty that if she had touched me, something terrible would have happened. And I've never ridden those trails alone again. My best friend's dad told this story so many times that the details never changed. which is part of why it stuck with me. He wasn't the type to exaggerate or chase attention. He was a quiet, steady guy who'd spent most of his life outdoors. Hunting, fishing, camping, all of it was normal to him. He knew what animals sounded like. He knew the difference between something explainable and something that wasn't. That's what made the story feel heavier every time he told it. He didn't say it like a campfire tale. He said it like a memory he wished he didn't have. This happened years before I met him, back when he was a younger man. He and a few close friends planned a fly fishing trip deep in the Ozarks. It was one of those trips where the whole point was to disappear for a few days. No phones, no crowds, no noise, just river water, trees, and a cabin far enough from civilization that you felt like a guest in the wilderness instead of the other way around. The cabin they rented sat in a small clearing near a river bend. The water ran fast there, loud enough to mask small sounds and give the whole area a constant rushing hum. The clearing itself was ringed by dense forest, thick trees, heavy underbrush, the kind of woods where visibility drops off after 20 yards. Once the sun set, the darkness didn't feel empty. It felt packed. Every shadow had weight. The first day was uneventful in the best way. They fished, cooked, drank a little, and enjoyed being away from work and family responsibilities. By nightfall, they were relaxed and loud in that way groups of men sometimes get when they feel safe and alone. They sat on the porch, tossing rocks into the tree line just to hear them smack trunks and branches. It was dumb entertainment, but it filled the quiet. Every impact echoed through the woods, followed by a few seconds of silence before the river swallowed the sound again. After a while, they started hearing movement from the direction they were throwing. At first, it was subtle, a branch snapping, leaves shifting, something large displacing the undergrowth. My friend's dad said the woods have a language, and if you spend enough time outside, you learn its rhythm. Small animals move differently than big ones. Wind has a pattern. Predators have intention in their sound. Whatever they were hearing wasn't wind. They stopped throwing rocks and listened. The movement continued. Slow, heavy, deliberate. One of the guys muttered that it was probably a bear they'd annoyed. Another said, wolf. The Ozarks aren't empty, and none of them wanted to push their luck by harassing a large animal in the dark. The mood shifted from playful to cautious in a few seconds. They backed inside the cabin and shut the door, telling themselves they'd just let whatever it was wander off. Inside, they joked about it to break the tension. Bears weren't uncommon. Wolves were rare, but not impossible. The cabin walls were solid. They locked up, checked the windows, and eventually went to sleep. The river's noise filled the gaps between their thoughts, and the night settled into that deep quiet that only happens far from cities. Then the crash came. He said it sounded like the sky falling. Not a knock, not a bump, but a violent explosion of wood and impact that shook the entire structure. All of them snapped awake at once, that instant clarity that comes when adrenaline hits before your brain catches up. For a few seconds, nobody moved. They just stared at each other in the dark, trying to understand what could make a sound like that. Someone grabbed a flashlight. Someone else grabbed a gun. They stepped onto the porch, expecting to see a tree limb that had broken loose or maybe storm damage. Instead, the beam of the flashlight landed on a boulder sitting half on the porch, half in the dirt. It had crushed part of the railing and gouged the wood like it had been dropped from a height. It wasn't a small rock. My friend's dad estimated around 400 pounds, maybe more. It wasn't something that rolled there naturally. The clearing was flat. There was no slope that could have carried it. And even if there had been, the angle didn't make sense. It had come from the tree line. The realization settled in slowly and horribly. Something had thrown it. They didn't say that out loud right away. Nobody wanted to be the one to voice it. They just stood there staring at the rock like it might explain itself. The woods beyond the porch were pitch black. The flashlight beams didn't travel far before the trees swallowed them. Instinct took over. They armed themselves properly and moved off the porch in a loose circle around the cabin. The air felt different outside, charged, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Every step they took sounded too loud. Twigs snapped under their boots and echoed in their ears. That's when he saw the movement. He said it wasn't a clear shape. It was the absence of stillness. Whole sections of trees swaying at once, not like wind, but like something large pushing through them. The undergrowth shook. Branches whipped back into place. Whatever was out there wasn't sneaking. It was big enough that subtlety didn't matter. Still thinking bear, he shouted toward the movement. A sharp, instinctive yell meant to scare it off. The sound tore through the clearing and died in the trees. The response came immediately. He struggled to describe it every time he told the story. He'd pause, searching for words, and finally settle on the phrase that stuck: a huge, yodeling bear. That was the closest comparison his brain could find. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a growl. It rose and fell in pitch in a way that felt wrong for any animal he knew. It was loud enough that he felt it in his chest more than he heard it with his ears. It carried intelligence, anger, a kind of mocking echo of his own shout. Every man there froze. The sound didn't belong to the catalogue of wildlife they understood. It didn't match bear, wolf, cougar, or anything they'd ever encountered. It was too controlled, too expressive. It sounded like something imitating an animal rather than being one. The movement in the trees continued for a few seconds after the call, then stopped. Silence dropped so hard it felt physical. Even the river seemed quieter. Nobody chased it. Nobody fired a shot. Every survival instinct told them the same thing: go inside and stay there. They backed toward the cabin without turning their backs on the forest. The door slammed shut behind them. Locks clicked. Furniture got dragged into place, even though they knew it wouldn't stop something that could throw a boulder. They sat awake for the rest of the night with their guns in their laps, listening. Nothing else came. No footsteps, no scratching at the walls, no second rock. Just the endless rush of the river and the pounding of their own hearts, slowly settling back into rhythm. Dawn took forever to arrive. When it finally did, the light felt like permission to breathe again. They stepped outside, expecting to find tracks, broken branches, something that would reduce the night to a solvable problem. The clearing looked almost normal, except for the wrecked porch and the boulder. At the edge of the trees, they found disturbed earth and snapped saplings, but nothing clean enough to read like a trail. Whatever had moved through there was careful or heavy enough to blur its own evidence. They didn't stay to investigate further. The trip ended that morning. Gear got packed in silence. Nobody said the word Sasquatch, not right away. They didn't need to. The thought hung in the air between them, unspoken and uncomfortable. These were men who prided themselves on practicality. Jumping to folklore felt ridiculous, but the alternative explanations were thinner. Bears don't throw rocks like that. They don't answer shouts with rising, almost vocal calls. They don't move through trees with that kind of upright force. The drive home was quiet. Every one of them replayed the night in their heads, trying to sand down the impossible edges. Years later, when my friend's dad told the story, he still sounded unsettled, not excited, not triumphant, just disturbed by the memory of something that didn't fit into the world the way he understood it. He never went back to that cabin. None of them did. What stayed with him most wasn't the rock or the sound. It was the feeling he had standing at the edge of that clearing, flashlight shaking in his hand, staring into trees that stared back. He said he'd spent his whole life believing humans were the loudest thing in the woods, the top of the food chain by default. That night flipped a switch in his brain. For a few seconds, he felt like prey, like he'd wandered into a place where he wasn't supposed to be, and something ancient had noticed. He never claimed certainty. He'd shrug at the end and say, maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was some unknown animal. Maybe fear twisted their perceptions. But every time he finished the story, there'd be a long silence. The kind that comes when nobody wants to laugh it off because laughing feels dishonest. Whether it was Sasquatch or something else entirely, he was sure of one thing. Something huge, strong, and aware was out there in those trees, and it didn't appreciate being pelted with rocks in the middle of the night. And the fact that it chose to warn them instead of coming closer was the part he was most grateful for. There are only a couple of things in my life that ever made me stop and sit there quietly, staring at nothing, trying to decide whether the world is stranger than we admit or whether coincidence can stretch farther than it has any right to. I'm not someone who jumps to paranormal explanations. I've always been pretty grounded, pretty practical. Most weird things have simple answers once you calm down and look at them long enough. But there are two moments that never fully settled in my mind. They just sit there, years later, like little splinters of doubt I can't pull out. The first one happened when I was around 18 or 19. It's strange how clearly I still remember the feeling of that night, even though the details of that year have mostly faded together. I was in that awkward stage between high school and real adulthood. I was staying up too late, sleeping odd hours, living in that half-chaotic rhythm that comes with being young and not yet tied down by a strict routine. That night didn't feel unusual when I went to bed. It was quiet, the kind of deep quiet that makes the air feel thick. I remember scrolling on my phone for a while, my room lit only by the dim glow of the screen, before I finally rolled over and let sleep pull me under. I woke up suddenly, violently, like I had been yanked out of a dream by invisible hands. At first I didn't even know why I was awake. Then the pain hit me fully. It was sharp and deep in my side, right near my hip, the kind of pain that steals your breath before you can even react to it. I sucked in air, and it felt like my body locked up around that one point. It wasn't a dull ache or a cramp you could stretch away. It felt targeted, intense, like something inside me had twisted wrong. I remember curling slightly, instinctively trying to protect the area. The room was dark and unfamiliar in that way rooms get when you wake up suddenly at night. Shadows looked thicker. The silence pressed in on my ears. For a moment I honestly wondered if something serious was happening, like my appendix had burst or a kidney stone had decided to ruin my life. Your brain goes to dramatic places at 3 a.m. Every second stretched. I kept waiting for the pain to either explode into something unbearable or fade into nothing. Instead, it just hovered there, steady and punishing. I checked the time on my phone. The light stung my eyes. I watched the minutes crawl by while I lay there breathing carefully, afraid that moving too much would make it worse. It lasted somewhere between 20 and 25 minutes, long enough that I started bargaining with myself about going to the hospital, long enough that I started running through who I'd call, how I'd explain it, whether I could even stand up. And then, just as suddenly as it arrived, it began to loosen its grip. The pain softened, like a fist slowly unclenching. Within a few minutes it was gone completely, leaving behind only a faint soreness and the echo of panic. I lay there stunned. I prodded the spot cautiously, expecting the pain to snap back, but it didn't. My body felt normal again. I told myself it must have been some weird muscle spasm, one of those random glitches bodies throw at you. Eventually exhaustion dragged me back to sleep, and by morning it felt almost silly, like I'd overreacted to a bad dream. A couple of days later, I was talking to my family, and the conversation turned serious in that quiet way that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. I was told my grandmother had fallen in the middle of the night earlier that week. She'd broken her hip badly. The timing came up in the conversation, almost as an afterthought, and something inside me went cold. The night they described matched the night I'd woken up in pain. Not just the same general evening, but the same window of time. She'd fallen not long before I jolted awake, clutching my side. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there, nodding, pretending I was processing the normal shock and worry you'd expect. Inside, my thoughts were racing. The location lined up too. Hip, side, the exact place where that pain had bloomed out of nowhere. I tried to rationalize it immediately. Coincidence. Bodies are weird. Brains are good at connecting dots after the fact. I told myself all of that over and over, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It wasn't dramatic or mystical. It was quieter than that. Just a heavy sense of, what are the odds? Even now, years later, I don't claim it meant anything supernatural. I don't tell it like proof of psychic bonds or fate or anything like that. But it sits in my memory as one of those moments where the world feels briefly transparent, like you're seeing threads you're not supposed to see. It was a small thing, but it shook my confidence in coincidence, just enough to leave a permanent mark. The second moment came earlier, back in high school, and it carried a completely different kind of weirdness. It happened in the middle of an ordinary day, the kind of day so normal it should have erased itself from memory. I was sitting in class, half paying attention, half drifting in that bored haze that settles over a room full of teenagers. The air was still, no windows open, no dramatic weather outside, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of papers. In the back of the classroom, there was a table where the teacher kept random items, extra supplies, stacks of books, and a framed picture that had been sitting there for as long as anyone could remember. It wasn't perched on the edge. It was placed squarely in the middle of the table, stable and forgotten. No one was near it. Everyone was in their seats. In the middle of a sentence the teacher was speaking, there was a sudden crack. The sound was sharp enough to snap every head around at once. The picture frame had fallen forward off the table and hit the floor face first. Not slid, not tipped slowly, fallen. It landed with enough force to scatter tiny shards of glass across the tile. For a second, nobody moved. The silence after the impact felt thick, like the air had been sucked out of the room. We all looked at each other, silently asking the same question. How? There hadn't been a bump or a vibration. No one had brushed the table. There was no breeze. The frame hadn't been balancing on the edge. It had been planted in the middle. To fall the way it did, it would have needed a push. The teacher walked back slowly, her face pale in a way that didn't match the situation. You'd expect annoyance at the mess or surprise at the noise. Instead, she looked resigned. That's the only word that fits. She stared down at the broken frame for a long moment before crouching to pick it up. When she turned back to us, there was this strange calm in her expression. She told us, very matter-of-factly, that she believed a ghost followed her. The room erupted immediately. Some kids laughed, assuming she was joking. Others leaned forward, suddenly interested. But she didn't laugh, she didn't smile. She spoke in the same tone she used for normal lessons, like she was explaining homework. She said strange things had followed her from place to place for years. Objects moving, doors opening, small disruptions that didn't make sense. She wasn't theatrical about it. If anything, she sounded tired. I remember the way my skin prickled while she talked. Not because I fully believed her, but because of the timing. The frame was still broken on her desk, or proof that something odd had just happened, whether or not you believed in ghosts. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe the table was uneven. Maybe vibrations from the hallway shook it loose. Maybe it had been closer to the edge than we thought. Every explanation felt thin. The rest of the class passed in a distracted blur. People kept glancing at the back table like it might move again. Every little sound made shoulders tense. When the bell rang, the hallway chatter was louder than usual. Everyone replaying the moment, exaggerating it already, turning it into a story. By the end of the day, it had probably grown into something much bigger in the retelling. I never saw anything like that happen again in her class. No flying objects, no slammed doors. It just normal days stacked on top of each other until graduation carried us all away. But that moment stayed with me in the same quiet way as the night of the hip pain. Not as proof of anything, not as a firm belief in ghosts or psychic connections, but as a reminder that reality occasionally slips just enough to make you question how solid it really is. When I look back on both events now, I still land in the same place. I don't know. Maybe coincidence is a deeper well than we think. Maybe our brains are wired to assign meaning where none exists. Or maybe there are tiny fractures in the everyday world where strange things leak through for a second before sealing up again. I don't build my life around those moments. I don't chase them, but I carry them with me. They're the stories that surface late at night when conversations turn quiet and honest. The kind you tell with a small shrug and a laugh that isn't entirely comfortable. Because no matter how rational you try to be, a part of you remembers the pain that arrived from nowhere at the exact wrong moment and the picture frame that leapt off a table without a touch, and you're left sitting there thinking the same simple thought I had back then. That's weird, and I don't think I'll ever fully explain it. I was around 17 when this happened, old enough to feel independent but still living fully inside the rhythm of my parents' house. It was one of those ordinary nights that didn't seem important at the time, the kind that blends into every other late night you spend as a teenager. I'd stayed up watching TV in the living room long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house had that quiet nighttime feeling where every sound seems louder than it should be. The refrigerator hummed. The air conditioner clicked on and off. Outside, the street was empty and still. I remember being stretched out on the couch, half paying attention to whatever show was on. It was something I'd seen before, one of those reruns that plays late at night when the networks run out of new content. The glow of the television was the only light in the room. I kept telling myself I'd go to bed after the episode ended, but I never did. The couch was too comfortable, and I was too lazy to move. At some point between 12:30 and 1:30 in the morning, I drifted off without even realizing it. I remember the feeling of my eyes getting heavy and the voices from the TV turning into background noise, then nothing. The next thing I remember is waking up suddenly. The room was dark except for the faint blue light of the TV menu bouncing around the screen. I checked the clock on the cable box. It said 4:30 a.m. That groggy, disoriented feeling hit me, the kind where you're not sure how long you've been asleep or what pulled you out of it. Everything felt normal, though. The house was quiet in the peaceful way it always is before sunrise. I shut off the TV, stretched, and shuffled down the hallway to my bedroom. I didn't notice anything strange. No adrenaline, no sense that anything was wrong. I climbed into bed and fell asleep almost instantly. When I woke up again, it was to sunlight coming through the blinds and the usual morning sounds of my parents moving around the kitchen. I got up, went to the bathroom, and walked out to grab breakfast like it was any other day. My mom was standing at the counter, coffee in hand, watching me in a way that immediately made me feel like I'd done something without knowing it. She asked me where I'd gone the night before. I laughed at first because I thought she was joking. I told her I'd been on the couch all night and had just gone to bed around 4:30. She didn't laugh back. She said she and my dad had both woken up around 2 a.m. to the sound of the front door closing. Not opening, closing. That heavy, unmistakable sound of the door latching that you can recognize even in your sleep when you've lived in the same house for years. They'd gotten up, confused, and gone downstairs to check. The house was dark. The living room lights were off. The couch was empty. My car wasn't in the driveway. At that point, they assumed I'd gotten a call from a friend who needed help. I'd done that before, giving people rides home when they were drunk or stranded. It wasn't unusual enough to cause panic. My dad sat on the couch, the same couch I'd supposedly been asleep on, and ate a midnight snack while watching TV. He stayed there until about 2:30 before heading back to bed. He said the house was completely quiet the entire time. I just stood there listening to her, feeling this slow, cold confusion spreading through me. I told her again that I hadn't gone anywhere. I'd been asleep on the couch. I remembered waking up at 4:30 and walking straight to my room. That was it. There was no gap in my memory, no hazy dream, nothing. She looked at my feet and told me to look down. The bottoms of my feet were filthy, not dusty from walking around the house. They were blackened with dirt, the kind that gets ground into your skin when you walk outside barefoot. There were little streaks and smudges like I'd stepped on pavement or gravel. I hadn't noticed it before because I'd gone straight from bed to the kitchen, but seeing it made my stomach drop. I had no explanation for it. I hadn't gone outside barefoot. I knew I hadn't. I would have remembered the cold ground, the texture, something. We checked my car. It was in the driveway that morning, parked normally. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. No damage, no mud splashed up the sides, nothing out of place. The gas gauge didn't tell us anything either. I wasn't the type of person who kept close track of mileage or fuel levels, so we couldn't even use that to figure out if it had been driven. That was the moment it hit me fully. According to my parents, I had left the house sometime after I fell asleep, taken my car, been gone for at least a couple of hours, come back, and walked inside barefoot. And I had absolutely no memory of any of it. If my mum hadn't said anything that morning, I would have gone my entire life not knowing it happened. That part messes with me more than anything. I woke up feeling rested, normal, like any other day. There was no headache, no soreness, no sense of missing time. Just a blank stretch where something had clearly happened. We tried to piece together a timeline. The show I remembered watching placed me asleep somewhere between 12:30 and 1:30. My parents heard the door at 2 o'clock. My dad sat on the couch until 2:30 and said I never came in while he was there. Yet I woke up on that same couch at 4:30. That meant I must have returned sometime after 2:30, but before 4:30, walked back inside and laid down again without waking myself up enough to form a memory. I searched my room, my pockets, my car, looking for anything that might explain it. A receipt, a text message, a missed call. There was nothing. My phone was on the charger where I'd left it. No outgoing calls, no messages. It was like I'd stepped out of existence for a few hours and then stepped back in. The dirty feet bothered me in a very specific way. It meant I hadn't just driven somewhere and come back. I'd been outside, walking around with no shoes. I tried to imagine myself doing that. Where would I go barefoot in the middle of the night? Why would I leave my shoes behind? Why would I drive anywhere at all? I asked my parents if they'd heard the car start or pull in. They both said no, just the door, that heavy closing sound. It was possible the engine noise hadn't woken them, but it still felt strange that the only thing they heard was the door. For weeks afterward, I kept expecting some memory to surface. A dream, a flash, anything. Nothing ever did. The night remained a solid wall in my mind. I'd lie in bed thinking about it, trying to push past that blank space. And all I'd get was the image of the TV glow and then waking up at 4:30. I started reading about sleepwalking because it was the only explanation that even came close. I'd never sleepwalked before, at least not that anyone knew of, but the stories I found were unsettling. People cooking meals in their sleep, driving cars, walking miles, holding conversations, entire complex behaviors carried out with no memory afterward. The brain is apparently capable of running the body on autopilot in ways that feel impossible until you read case after case. Even with that explanation, it didn't sit right. Sleepwalking usually leaves clues. Doors left open, objects moved, signs of activity. We found nothing. The house was exactly as it had been. The only evidence that anything happened at all was my parents hearing the door and the dirt on my feet. I asked them over and over if they were sure, if maybe they dreamed it, but they were firm. They both woke up. They both checked. My dad physically sat on the couch and watched TV in the same space I supposedly returned to later. He would have seen me come in, unless I came back after he went to bed, which pushed everything later into that 2:30 to 4:30 window. That thought creeped me out in a quiet way. The idea that I walked into the house in the dead of night, barefoot and silent, while everyone slept, and laid back down exactly where I'd been before. Like the night had folded in on itself. Life moved on, but the memory of that morning stuck with me. It wasn't dramatic. There were no flashing lights or supernatural elements. Just a missing piece of time and physical proof that I'd been somewhere I couldn't remember. Sometimes that feels more unsettling than any ghost story. There's no monster to blame, no outside force to point at. Just your own mind doing something without you. Even now, years later, I'll occasionally look at my feet when I wake up in the middle of the night. I'll check the doors. I've never had another incident like it. No more missing hours. No strange clues. It was a single event that never repeated, which somehow makes it stranger. If it were a pattern, I could label it, manage it, turn it into a condition with a name. Instead, it's just this one perfect gap. What unsettles me most is how ordinary the night felt from my perspective. I went to sleep, I woke up, that's it. If no one had told me otherwise, that would be the entire story. It makes you realize how much of your sense of reality depends on other people confirming it. Without my parents, that night would have been smooth and continuous in my memory. With them, it's a mystery I carry around with no ending. I still don't know where I went. I don't know what I did. I don't know why my feet were dirty or why my car left the driveway. All I know is that for a few hours I existed somewhere outside my own awareness, and then I came back and slipped into sleep like nothing had happened. And sometimes when I'm lying awake too late at night, I wonder what it says about the brain that it can take you on a trip and erase the map completely, leaving you with nothing but footprints you don't remember making. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.